you can run a restaurant, you can run anything. And I really believe that. In fact,
Amen.
if you look at my background, I ran a healthcare company for a period of time, right? And I ran it like a restaurant company. So I honestly believe if you can run a restaurant, you can run anything.
Welcome to Restaurant 365 Presents Behind the Numbers. This is a show where we talk to restaurant owners, operators, chefs, kitchen managers, CFOs, and everyone in between about what makes successful restaurants tick. This is episode 2, and I don't want to say we're peaking early, but we've got some powerhouse guests today I'm very excited to talk to. I'm your host, Marc Cohen.
And I'm Rich Sweeney, and we're excited today to be here with the legendary chef and restaurateur Michael Mina, along with Mina Group CEO Jason Himber. Michael, chef, is the chef founder and executive chairman of Mina Group, an award-winning restaurant management company with a collection of over 30 chef-driven concepts all over the globe that showcase the best food, wine, and spirits. We could spend an entire episode on this man's bio alone, but let's just say he was born in Cairo, Egypt, raised in Ellensburg, Washington, and has been honored with numerous accolades, including a Michelin star for his restaurant, Michael Mina, James Beard Foundation's Who's Who of Food and Beverage, and Bon Appetit Chef of the Year. Jason has had nearly 2 decades of creating and growing companies across the hospitality industry. He's held key leadership positions in finance, mergers and acquisitions, design and development, operations, and marketing at Yum Brands, CMG companies, Wells Fargo, GE Capital. The list just goes on and on. And at Mina Group, he is responsible for the overall performance of the company and its growth strategy, as well as overseeing multiple key business functions, including operations, marketing, real estate, development, capital raising, and investor relations.
Super impressive. Look, before we jump in, I just have a quick reminder to everybody. Please like, subscribe to the show, wherever you're watching or listening. Please leave a review. It helps us in so many ways, but most importantly, it helps us continue to bring you these great conversations. So let's jump in, Rich.
Cool. So, Chef Jason, we always like to start with kind of one big question. What's one of the probably the most important thing that leaders focus on at store operations or finance should keep in mind these days?
Go ahead, chef.
Well, I think that, a lot of people are saying that this generation is harder to get motivated and get them to do things. And it's actually not true. It's actually, I think that more than ever now, you need a very, very clear path to show them how what they're doing benefits them. And you can't just talk the talk anymore. You have to have the tools, and your company has to follow the disciplines themselves of having the structure, having the tools, being able to measure what's being done. And when you do that, you actually can really get this generation very motivated, because if they see a very crystal clear path to their growth, you will get a lot out of them. But you can't, it's not the old way of doing things. You can't just put your arm around them and say, I'm going to build you, blah, blah, blah. They need to see it. They need to tangibly feel it. And you need to really have systems that show them how they're going to get from where they are today and what it's going to do for them.
Yeah. And I would echo what Michael's saying. I think goal setting and pushing people towards being goal oriented. I think naturally everybody likes achievement, right? And success begets success, and wins beget wins, right? So I think Michael's absolutely right about that. The other thing is, I think that we focus on a lot more and more now as a company is just remembering that everybody here is a human being, that we're all people, we're all dealing with stuff, and everybody's got family things and relationship things and whatnot. And I say that because I would argue that we live in a world now that's kind of more disconnected than ever before, right? With people living behind screens and, technology really taking center stage and avoiding a lot of human interaction. And I think that that's also made people to some degree be sort of less convivial, less supportive of one another at times, get more easily frustrated. And so I think pushing people to remember we're all human beings and we're all dealing with stuff is really important.
That's awesome, man. Especially these days, it's funny how I see things kind of go full circle. It goes back to, kind of for the team, it's what's in it for them. The good old whiff 'em. But you can't just tell somebody. You've got to be able, like you said, Chef, you got to be able to show them that path of here's where you're at now, here's how you're moving, progressing forward, so that they can really see it for themselves. Definitely important for folks these days.
And I know it's cliche, but it starts at the top, right? It has to. Otherwise, there's no way it's going to trickle
100%.
down.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that that's where we're spending a majority amount of our time right now is training the trainers, training the leaders. We put into our company this year for the first time. We put in a whole department. We put in a whole department of compliance, and we had never done that before. We had always looked at it a little different, and we brought two very seasoned operators who had done a lot, and as opposed to like looking at it through an HR lens, we looked at it more as a compliance lens, because that is also the people that are running, career pathing, and at the end of the day, you can't career path somebody if they're in a restaurant that's not performing
Right.
and not doing things the right way. And so it really has become, kind of the backbone for the last, for this last year and moving forward for Mina Group for the next 20 years.
And it's 2,800 employees, almost 2,900 employees across the
Yeah,
organization.
they're direct and indirect. So in our partnerships in the hotels, that's indirect. So they might be employees of the hotel, but 2,900 people that are using our systems, our platforms, our standard operating procedures, things of that nature.
Amazing.
And that's across what, 30 some odd, almost 40 different locations?
31 now, Jason. I
Yeah.
think we're 31
And
now,
a lot in development.
but we have 10 in the ground right now, 10
Wow.
being built. So we'll be 41 in like 16 months. So
I know Rich
Damn.
wants to know how many recipes you have.
36,000 in recipe exchange.
Wow.
And that was the first tool that we really built. So we got 36,000 recipes. I think we got like 4,000 videos, learning videos
And
with
this is
those
an
to do.
internal platform.
It is. It's something we built, early on. And if I look back at Mina Group, it's probably one of the most essential things that created our success of being able to scale and expand. And since Jason's come on, we've continued to upgrade it and upgrade we really, the last couple of years, we took a break from opening restaurants. When Jason came on, he really said, look, it was great to have a person that kind of just slowed us down to speed us up and said, we're going to take a break. We're going to build out, we've got some of these things, but they're about, they're a little dated, and we're going to build them. We're going to build everything out to where we have, really have these systems upgraded. And we did it for about 2 years. And now as we're opening restaurants, we can see the difference of how we used to open compared to how we open now, and then how we operate versus how we operated before.
Yeah, I think to Michael's point, I would just say that I think, it's easy to focus on recipes being recipes, but the reality is what it really was creating a system that allowed the business to scale, right? Because
Right.
scaling across the country and scaling across the globe, how do you maintain quality, consistency, all those things, right? When you can't possibly have somebody in every market, in every restaurant, right? Controlling all of that. So I think early on, Michael had the foresight to say, we need to create scalable systems to create a scalable company, right? And so I think we've really, and I'd say, like Michael said, in the last 2 years in particular, we have really focused heavily on what does scale look like going forward, and how are the needs of scale different today versus maybe they were 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I'd add to that the one thing that Jason screamed from the from the rafters, he's like, everything we build that is, when it is possible, which is a lot more than people think, not only are we going to have the ability to, educate and give people direction on how to do it, we're going to measure it. And we're going to measure the backside, because as we measure the backside, it does two things. It lets us know how successful what we're doing is, but it also really is great for the individuals, because it really does help them grow their career because they're seeing the results of what they're doing.
Yeah, there's no outcomes without measurement, right? And I know,
Yeah.
reading about your organization, you really empower the chef and the GM at each of your restaurants. Those are like,
Yeah.
you empower them to basically take like an ownership mentality.
Well, so yeah. I mean, what we do is we have a very, very structured, we call it a 4-box system, basically. And we have 4 areas in which we have about 45 serious SOPs, and they all fall into one of the boxes. And the last box being the people box. And so we meet every week. The above store leaders meet every week and go through different restaurants each week. And so by the month, we pretty much get through every restaurant. And we use the hierarchy in the sense that, we hold the directors responsible to make sure that the chefs and general managers are compliant in all the areas. Because if they're not, then it just works its way down. So then they have to hold the all the employees that are not that are managing hourly functions. So whether it's assistant managers or sous chefs, or even if it's a lead bartender or a sommelier, the GM is required to hold them accountable. And then that group is the group that really holds the hourly employees accountable. And the best way, obviously, to hold them accountable is to show them, what the tools are doing for them, for the guest, for the rest of the staff, and, for their coworkers. If one person's not using them, it's affecting their other coworkers because everyone's working off of the playbook. And then ultimately, that's what affects the restaurant.
That's
Love
awesome.
that culture of accountability, really kind of taking it from the top down so that you can hold even the line level employees accountable for what they need to be doing, but really, kind of owning it from the top of the ladder as well.
And
With that in
go ahead,
Oh, yeah.
Chef. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, with that in mind, I mean, we're talking about, this massive company now that's doing so well with constant, growth and more things coming together. I guess if you guys don't mind, kind of take us back to the beginning. Like, what was the origin story
Sure.
behind you kind of starting all of this, Chef?
Well, it's so funny you ask. Jason, you want me to take this one, or do
Yeah,
you want
no,
to?
it's your origin, man. You take it.
Well, it's funny you ask because I have my old my general manager from the original Michael Mina at the Westin, where we got 2 Michelin stars, and we were doing everything in trios. So every single dish was done 3 ways. So we kind of, when we used to count covers, we say, okay, well, we did 150 covers, but we really did 450 covers tonight because everything was done in threes. And so we probably went. So the 2 restaurants where really the disciplines of Mina Group and the foundation started. Now, obviously, we've had to expand it over time to keep up with the times. But where it all started was Aqua, when we did that in San Francisco, because that kind of redefined fine dining at the time. There was only 2 4-star restaurants in San Francisco. One was Florida Lee and one was Moss's. And at that point, fine dining was really like, what I call whisper joints. You'd go in and you'd be about 50 covers and you felt like you had to whisper in the restaurant and everything else. And then Aqua, we totally broke the mold. We put a bar in the middle. It was dark. We played music, we played good music, but we played it loud, and people would complain about, we were like, people are going to complain. 5% are going to complain about, the noise. And then we were doing 500 covers a day, and we still got 4 stars. And really, I think that was because we had to do that. We had to redefine like so many systems. And I had worked in 4-star restaurants. I'd worked in New York, and I was like, okay, it's broken. It's backwards if you want to do this, because people want fine dining. They want the level of food and service. And you could see the shift was happening. they don't want to sit there for 5 hours anymore. Maybe 10% of people do, but 90% don't. So what are we going to start to put in place to be able to really customize people's timing of their meals, right? And so we had to flip the whole script of waiters firing food. We put in one person that was, we called them a table checker, and that was their only job, was to go around and, really time the tables. We put in a lot of systems. It became a lot of systems. And so those systems then really got expanded. We started doing multiple restaurants, and we saw how those systems, because that was a restaurant in which we worked in. I worked at it 9 years every day. So every day you've got to get better, right? You're getting worse. There's no such thing as staying flat.
Exactly.
So when we went to the West End, it was like, okay, now we're going to the St. Francis. It's a union run property. So there's already more, and I wasn't scared of it. I was like, look, if I'm going to get the best location in the city, I know I'm going to have to deal with something, right? And, and to get the Compass Rose and to get the St. Francis, especially at that time, to be over Union Square. And it's like, yeah, I'm going to have to deal with something. But of course, maybe, I don't know if I'd do this again today, but I was still younger, still had more energy, and still crazier than ever, in the sense of saying, okay, well, at that point I was really into like taking a product and saying, well, how do we really, if it's like a baby lamb and we're going to do 3 preparations of it, and guests would flip out when you did that, and so I was like, we're going to do the whole menu like that, right? And we're going to give people, some of them were 6 preparations, like you do hot and cold with 3 items. And so we really, really pushed the envelope more than ever. And then that was like, okay, a whole nother level of systems. And then we also had to create some systems for the union to function within a union environment. And then that kind of became the foundation of growth, is like really saying, okay, how do we, capture what we're doing? How do we put it into something that's digestible to use as we try to duplicate what we're doing? How do we take it and the next restaurant we open, not start from scratch every restaurant? How do we really create something that we can scale? And so that was the foundation of it. And, it worked, my second restaurant was Michael Mina Bellagio. So I learned a lot about how you deal with hotel partners and everything else. And, with hotel partners, they're going to have different systems, and you got to overface with their systems, but not lose what you're doing, because that's, I think, the biggest issue where people get frustrated if they have a hotel partner. They feel like they can't run their same restaurant, but a lot of times it's because they don't bring it to the table, something that's so structured that the hotel actually is like, oh, okay, let's do it your way.
You're never going to say that.
Yeah, we've been pretty fortunate.
All right, good. Yeah, that's great. It's
pretty
interesting to hear, you're talking about all these systems you've just rolled out, but clearly this was the fundament from day one. Like, we've got to have these systems in place, or we're not going to be successful.
Yeah. And it was the workflow. It's the daily meeting, everything that really happens at the daily meeting. Again, accountability is the biggest thing. Being able to say, okay, this is what we said we were going to do, and now how do we make sure we actually did it?
And I think
So Mina Group forms 2002. Jason, when did you join?
I joined in 2021.
Okay. And you sort of cut your teeth in QSR a little bit back in the day?
A little bit of everything. Yeah. I mean, a lot of different restaurant segments. Honestly, I had done everything but fine dining, before linking up with Michael.
Like, hospitality fundamentals, do they just transfer over, or is there a shift there?
It's funny. And I've said this before, if you can run a restaurant, you can run anything. And I really believe that. In fact, if you look at my background, I ran a healthcare company for a period of time, right? And I ran it like a restaurant company. So I honestly believe if you can run a restaurant, you can run anything. I think, it's really interesting, right? Because what I would argue is the fundamentals of running any business are always the same, right? Find great people, empower them to do big things, have great systems, have accountability and follow up, right? Great communication, all those things I think are universal. And what I think is interesting though, and some of the stuff that I've tried to bring into our business is, when you think about the QSR world or even fast casual, there's a lot less margin to play with in those businesses that don't serve alcohol and don't have the things that full service dining or fine dining have, right? So you really start, I've told before, but I remember getting in a really heated conversation with somebody when we were, dealing with the Taco Bell brand about whether or not we should have a fork and a spoon or just go to a spork. Right, because the spork would save the system $20 million, right? And so,
that's a lot of
and
money.
so I say that because I think now, in all honesty, for many years, this business was able to operate in kind of a lower cost of capital, lower inflation environment, than it is today. And I think now you're in an environment, right, where the macroeconomic headwinds are getting a lot more challenging than they've been in maybe, a decade or two. And so you really have to have more of that mindset of how do I find margin maybe in places I didn't look before, right? And how do I optimize things in a way where QSR, I think, is forced to iterate on that daily, and these businesses might have looked at them yearly. And now we're having to iterate the same way that those businesses have to make sure we remain, competitive from a pricing standpoint, quality standpoint, et cetera. But, the thing I was going to mention a moment ago too, Marc, is, it's interesting because, I think while we had all these systems and processes which made the company very successful, I think part of what Michael and I did, like I said, when I joined the company, I remember saying to Michael, I don't think we should open any more restaurants for the next year or two, and we should just focus on internally. And, he thought I was crazy, obviously.
Yeah.
Not great at the time. I mean, it wasn't the best reaction I've ever gotten, but I think now sitting on the back end of it, we're all happy we did it because I don't think it was for us. What I'm fortunate about is it wasn't that we didn't have a system or process. It's that we looked at the world post-COVID and said, the world has fundamentally changed. We can't just assume that the systems and processes don't need to evolve. Doesn't mean they're wrong. They just need to evolve, right? And you could even look at things that I'm not saying we've necessarily done all this, but just as a made up example, right? I would argue that to some degree, people today are spending less time in a restaurant than they did pre-COVID. So that obviously has a trickle down effect on timing standards, has a trickle down effect on service standards, has a trickle down effect on everything, right? So it's less about creating systems and processes from scratch and more about evolving them for today's consumer, but also today's employee, right? And how they work and how they learn and how they consume information.
And this is why we're now seeing Taco Bell serving margaritas. They finally figured it out, right?
I'm telling you what, man, yeah, absolutely. 100%. That's where the margin is. So they've wised up for sure.
And what was the latest thing I think I saw? It was like a partnership with Milk Bar for a birthday cake churro. I mean, with things like that are happening now, kind of, looking at fast casual QSR brands, kind of partnering up with higher end brands. I mean, is there a secret partnership in the future where Michael Mina's recipes would be used somewhere that, like everybody could be, kind of grabbing it? I mean, anything like that in the future landscape?
I'll start, and then I'll let Michael jump in on this one. But so I don't want to spill the beans on anything. We do have a couple. I'll say this: there's no shortage of people that want a piece of Michael. That's for sure. There's a lot of people that would love the opportunity to showcase whether it's their liquor or whether it's a food product or whether it's something, right? Doing stuff with Michael. But what I would say is I also think this is the most exciting time ever, probably in the history of food and beverage. And I say that because you're bringing up some great examples of things that you see in the QSR and fast casual space. But what I also see is, I think the boundaries between sort of where food starts and stops and where fun begins and or where other things begin has really become blurred. I look, it was the first time ever, right? Louis Vuitton's got a cafe now, right? I just saw that Piaget or Breitling or somebody just opened a cafe inside of a watch store, right? What I think is so interesting is you don't see restaurants or food and beverage bringing Louis Vuitton purses into the restaurant, right? Instead, you see them going in reverse and they're bringing F&B into their, not yet, not yet. Maybe we'll start giving those out as to-go bags. I don't know. But I say that only because I think this is really fun because Michael and I now are looking at opportunities that I don't think ever existed before and interesting partnerships, right? Because fundamentally people believe food and beverage is more important to the consumer experience than ever before, right? And whether it's a hotel or a sports team or whatever it may be, people know that food and beverage is a highlight. It's no longer an afterthought, right? And it needs to be on point. And so I'd say it opens us up to a lot of really cool things that we're discussing right now.
Because Chef, to your point, it's always been about the experience, right? Like that's core to dining out, whether it's, you know, a larger experience than just a restaurant. Yeah, it's critical.
Absolutely. And I think that it is about the experience. And I think that, you know, the experience evolves, and the experience is, you know, really depends on, I think, where you become, when you look at it, when you look at everything as a whole, you start to see like, okay, well, with a group like us, people hire us for a couple reasons. You know, partner with us for a few reasons. One, obviously, what we bring to the table in operating. But really, the second one is maybe they love a brand we already have. Like maybe they love bourbon steak and they want a bourbon steak and they've seen bourbon steak and we want exactly that, right? But I think now we've done it for so many years and people have seen us. I mean, we've created probably 35 concepts over the years, right? So they know that we can customize a concept if need be. And so I think, you know, in this day and age, you know, people always want that shiny new toy and to be able to say it's customized. We just opened in Saudi Arabia. And even though we have a Middle Eastern concept, Orla, they said, well, we want it to feel, you know, and to speak to people in Saudi and to have Saudi influence. Well, the good news is with us, they can pinpoint and say, okay, well, we know you can do that because we've seen Orla and we've seen, you've already, you know, proven you can do a very unique kind of Middle Eastern concept. And so they do that. And then, you know, and then obviously now in this day and age, we have the ones we call the clubstaurants. There's restaurants that are morphing into like, you know, DJs and clubs, and people love that. And so, you know, that's something you have to evolve with the times. We're working on creating some of that, and that's part of evolving. And so people start to utilize restaurants different than they did in the past. And that's the point that I think people struggle with, even myself. You struggle with that because it's like easier to, you know, and mentally you can get your head around and convince yourself that, you know, you need to, you know, it's like we got to stick to what we do, right? But it's what you do is the restaurant business. You got to evolve into what people want. And so I think that that's the piece. And there's always going to be a market for a great Japanese restaurant, a great steakhouse or whatever. It's just a matter of, you know, what type of atmosphere and environment and guest kind of, how do you want the guest to use your space? And then I think if you can layer onto it, you know, I always laugh about it because I'm like, the original clubstaurant was Aqua in 1991, and it got 4 stars because it had the music, it had the lighting, it had the beautiful people, it had the buzzing bar in the middle of the room, and it's kind of like everything goes full circle, you know.
The clubstaurant, I love it. And so I was surprised to find, so I want to talk about the cookbook just for a minute.
Sure.
I was surprised to find out that's only your second cookbook.
Yeah, when it comes to cookbooks, for me, everybody's got their own philosophy. I mean, a lot of people do them. You know, financially, you can do well with cookbooks, but to me, that's not where the soul of a cookbook is for me. To me, it's like, you know, a book takes, as far as I'm concerned, it's a 10, 12-year process doing a book. And you have to, you know, I only do them when I have something that I really want to share with the world. And the first book was really important to me because I had built my career at Aqua and unfortunately had to split up with my partner, and I had to build Michael Mina, and I wanted everyone to see that what I was building was, more dynamic than what we had built at Aqua. And so that book was really, really personal to me, because it really was a time in my career where things could have gone either way. A lot of times you build a brand, and as a chef, that brand gets built bigger than your name. And I think Aqua, that was the case. And so, I really wanted to do this book and to show everybody, what it was that we were doing next. And then this book was all about the fact that, when I grew up in a town where, I was always trying to hide the fact that I was from Egypt and from the Middle East. It was not something that I wanted to go out and scream from the rafters. And when I went away to cooking school is when I started using my middle name, using Michael. And when I did my first restaurants back in 91, yeah, I could have just gone and done a Middle Eastern restaurant, but I wanted to avoid that completely. At the time, it wasn't the time to do it or anything else. And as I've gotten older, I'm like, really embraced my culture, embraced the Middle East, embraced it much more, because that is the foundation that created everything for me. And so, I wanted to do it, but I wanted to do it in a way where, we were really kind of giving back as well and getting Egypt a little bit more on the map, because they're on their way, like Israel, Lebanon, some of these countries that are very, that are known for their food. Egypt should be the leader of that, of everything in the Middle East when it comes to things like that. And so, just in a tiny way, I wanted to be able to bring that out. And so that's why it was so important to do it the way we did it, where we went to Egypt multiple times. We took the traditional dishes and said, it's time to push. I did the book just as much for myself and for the public. I did it for the young people in Egypt, but I mean, young as people that are cooking, that think that they can only cook, the traditional dishes, and did it in a way where I showed them how they could elevate their dishes and start to build, because what you need to build a country or a city, you need the younger people to start to push the envelope and evolve the food. And that's what the whole point of the book was.
Yes, it definitely seems profoundly personal. I love it.
Yeah.
It's a great idea for a cookbook. And, at the end of the day, to your point, food is what I think brings us all together anyway. It's a cultural staple. Like, that's what's going to bring people together at the end of the day.
100%.
It's kind of like, as you mentioned, getting the younger people to be involved with it, kind of moving food forward. I guess, how have you seen that for yourself as far as like mentoring people, kind of the folks on your team for both of you, kind of how do you help people, kind of embrace the roots, but also move forward and kind of elevate things as they go, like today with Mina Group?
So I guess from my perspective, it's maybe two things, and Michael could speak more, specifically to the chefs and what that looks like. But I think it's two things. I think one is trying to help people realize, at the end of the day, most people that come into these places aren't starting from scratch. From any business that you come into, right? You're building upon some kind of foundation. And so, there's got to be some tribute or some respect, if you want to call it, for the fact that none of us in any company, right, are starting from zero, right? The reality is there's some infrastructure in place. But I think also it's about, giving people creative license to fail, and letting people know that it's a safe environment to do so, right? I say to people all the time in our business, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but, I say I believe very strongly in creating hypotheses and testing them, right? And to me, a hypothesis isn't just a wild guess, right? I mean, you think about it, you come up with, some criteria, and you really say, okay, here, we're going to go do X, and we think Y or Z is going to be the result, right? And I think that the reality of that is that I want to encourage people to take thoughtful swings, right? And I don't care if they're big swings, but take thoughtful swings, right? And know that, as I say frequently in our company, no one is right 100% of the time. for us, for partners to want to work with us and for us to build a brand, we've got to be right more than we're wrong. That's for sure. But we don't have to be right 100% of the time, right? So I want an environment where people feel like if they're not pushing the envelope, this isn't the right place for them, right? I want people to push, but know that it's a safe environment to do so. Otherwise, it's real easy in this day and age to fall behind. If you're not constantly pressing forward, I would argue, you're already 2 laps behind.
Yeah, that's inspiring. That
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so this is one that really means a lot to me when I hear the word mentorship, because I think people, for many, many years, everybody's been like, oh, well, we want to do the article on your tree and all the people that have come, that you've mentored. And I look at mentorship in a very different way, I think, than a lot of other people. I look at your job to mentor people. you know, it's not, we all learn from each other in a restaurant. You're learning from everyone. You're learning from the dishwasher, you're learning from the servers, and they're learning from you. And it's partnership versus mentorship. But your job as a leader is to put everything in place and hold the accountability of the business to say, this is how we're going to do things at a top level. So there is structure. So when that person comes in, it could be that a cook came in and they were completely mentored when it comes to cooking by my sous chef or by my chef. But it still happened within our system, within our ecosystem, within our world. And that's our job as leaders, is to create an environment. I have people that tell me, I can't thank you enough. Because, when you have this many restaurants, you're not working side by side with everybody, right? You are at the beginning and at the opening and everything else. But what you're doing is you want them to walk away and say, my time with Mina Group, I learned this, and this. And then that also motivates them to give back and to bring their skills to the table. And once their skills are better, people are very interesting, because as soon as they get, until a person is very confident, you're not getting, when a person has a little fear and they're not confident, you're not getting the true person, right? A server, when they don't know exactly what wines, how to talk about the wines or this or that, they go to a table, you're not getting their real personality. You're not getting get out. So your job is to get them up to speed and hold them accountable as quick as possible to learn that for their best interest, and obviously for the guest's best interest.
So, Jason, I know we're going to lose you in a few minutes here, but speaking of systems, I wanted to ask quickly, when you joined the company, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Restaurant 365. Obviously, that solution was in place when you joined the company. Have you found that to be part of this sort of feedback loop we're talking about, right?
Yeah,
Does
look,
this allow transparency for your operators at a level that they might not have had before?
1,000,000%. Look, I think, we've been bolting on and utilizing more and more of the modules and the things within the Restaurant 365 ecosystem, as we've gone forward. And I think that the capabilities of it, frankly, have just grown exponentially just in the time that I've been part of this business. One of the things in general that I strongly dislike in this industry is that, unfortunately, you have to use so many systems that the thing is so a bit dysfunctional, honestly, that you're using all these different systems and Frankensteining things. And I think the more we can do within the Restaurant 365 ecosystem, the better. But as Michael said early on, at my core, I believe what gets measured gets better, right? And so being able to use the tools within Restaurant 365, I think, has done two things. One, it's allowed us to streamline reporting and streamline analytics for the business, which saves time and money. But two, it allows us to give valuable information to people to create change, right? We've really pushed to make this a much more data-driven company. And the tools that Restaurant 365 has really allow us to do that better than any other system that I've worked with, right? So 100%, I wouldn't give a plug if I didn't think it was great, but I do think it's a great system, and I've worked with a lot of horrible systems. And so I think it's a great system. And I do think that it is responsible for helping us to kind of deliver best in class results, not just to our partners and to our guests, but to, in the industry as a whole.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah. I'm going to take that as your hot take. So I usually ask for a hot take of like a trend in the industry you want to see go away. It sounds to me like the Frankenstein software wheel needs to go away.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
All right.
You got a hot take, Chef?
A hot take?
Yeah. Anything in the hospitality industry that a trend you want to see go away or maybe come back?
A trend I want to see go away or come back. I would say
mine is QR codes, to be fair.
yeah. I mean, I think Jason, what he just said is definitely important. I think that probably I would say
It's tough.
yeah, because outside of operate like what you said, like operating systems, things like that are continuing to move the restaurant forward. Restaurants need to have their own character. They need to have their own DNA, and so it's hard. Besides just the norm of like the trend I'd like to see go away is bad restaurants. I mean,
Great
like
answer.
places that
Yes.
aren't being ran right, because honestly they affect your industry. They affect
Absolutely.
how your industry is viewed. And I think that I think the one thing that has that's kind of helping that has helped our industry is I'm not big in television because I always look at it as like I can't do both and do them right, either one of them right. Television is a big commitment, time wise and mentally, and it's hard to do that and run a large group of restaurants. I'd much rather be in the restaurants, but it has had a good effect in so many ways. It's had a really good effect on getting people to look at our industry. Now, having said that, I think that as you start to get into more of the shows that have to create a lot of drama, those don't have a great effect on your industry, because it's like, I always look at it as my father, went crazy when I told him that I was going to go, back in '84, that I wanted to be a chef, and nowadays we got to a place where, we got to a place in, after Food Network and a lot of what was happening then, like Emerald Show and things like that, where people would bring their CEOs would bring their children in to me and say, my son wants to be a chef, my daughter wants to be a chef, what do you got in for? And so that was great. But I think that like keeping that, if you start to like, every industry has, an underbelly to it. And I'd like to see people not focus on that and just say, okay, it is what you're going to make it. And so, because it is a really, it's like Jason said, I think one of the most interesting things I did, I was asked to do a panel, and and to come up with really to come up with what I wanted to present at the panel. And I looked at how many enormously successful people, CEOs, founders, had time in the restaurant business, worked in the restaurant business before they went on to build, Credit One Bank or this or that, and so I got a few people and, did that. And it's just so interesting. So I just think that it's important to, you know, I'd say that to answer your question, I'd say that, always trying to show your business in a great light, your industry in a great light, so that you can get the really talented people, intelligent people to want to do it, because it is hard work. Our business is mental, it's physical, it's emotional, it's everything. It's all, you're using everything. And it's not always glamorous when you're in the kitchen. The front side is glamorous, but it doesn't always feel glamorous, especially.
There's non-glamour moments on both sides of the house. Yeah.
Right. And so I think that we want to continue to get more and more people excited about being in our industry. And that's how we're going to continue to make our industry better.
Absolutely. Well, look, gentlemen, I know you're busy. I know you've got a lot going on. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. This was a fantastic conversation. If you want to learn more about the book is My Egypt. I also found out your wife makes a Bloody Mary mix when I was doing my research. I cannot wait to try this.
There's nothing like it.
And if you want to learn more about Michael and the Mina Group, you can go to theminagroup.com. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at the Mina Group. I suggest you definitely visit one of the restaurants in San Francisco, Santa Monica, Washington, Vegas, as we heard, Dubai, Miami, Nashville, Scotts. I mean, they are all over the world, and they're fantastic if you've never been to one of their restaurants. So everybody, we hope you have a great day, a great shift, a great quarter, a profitable Monday, wherever you are and wherever your restaurant may be. And again, don't forget to like, subscribe everywhere. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, basically anywhere you listen, and follow us on social media as well. Chef, Jason, Rich.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Appreciate you making the time.
Appreciate you guys. Take care.